Are are we live? Yes, we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome on to my Friday stream. As you could say, today things are a little bit different from my usual Fridays. We're not going to be doing gaming today. Instead, we're taking what I usually do on my Saturday streams, which is Dungeons and Dragons talk, and we're doing it today. There's a couple reasons for this change. The first is, hey there, Seth. Hey, Wood Bogus. How's it going? The first is, my usual compatriot from Monster Hunter is a little tied up at the moment. Yo, Sour Cake. It is me. The second is that last stream, when I was going to be giving my players' characters' backstories, things got a little driven off topic by my chat, and we ended up having to instead make a surprise encounter for my party, which hasn't been run yet, and probably won't be run next session, but we're definitely coming up on the Spore Hag. Hey, good evening to you as well. And the third and final reason for this big change is that something very interesting happened over the week. I ended up showing up on a friend of my stream, that would be Juniper Actius, and after that little show, my follower count spiked to a point that I was terrified of Streamlabs constantly pinging me off. It got to such a stage I had to turn it off for a few days in the week. But I was very excited to see how many of the new followers would actually be showing up and checking out the channel. So I wanted to make sure that for my first stream with a sudden possible glut of viewers, it would be something a little more me focused and a little less gaming. Ooh, it's if it's any better here in England, it is Saturday. Hell yeah. Yo, you can't just tell us you are from a long line of witches and leave it at that. You have a good point. And maybe that will come up as a topic that we can vote on at the poll at the end of the stream. Yes, that's right, Brainless. I have you on the hook. However, today, as you can see if you're looking at the title, or at my fun little teaser here, we're going to be discussing Dungeons and Dragons. I believe this is my 8th or so stream on this topic. I've talked in the past about my homebrew world that I've created, entirely custom, made of 74 unique countries, of which we'd covered the lore of 2 or 3 so far. I've talked about the very first arc in my campaign in the city-state of Scarin, and how the party got in and out of a lot of trouble there. We've talked about some of my favorite homebrew rules, magic items, and other elements I like to introduce into my game. But, although I've told many stories of the campaign, of how I built it, of my player's first story through it, I have failed to make time to tell you about the characters. So glad Brainless thought that up. I almost forgot about that. Oh, hell yeah. So today, we're going to be going over the backstories of every one of the player characters from my campaign. That means we'll be covering some characters who are no longer with the party, some that have been with the party from the beginning, and some you have not met yet during our story times, but will be coming soon. Now then, before we get into the backstory, yes, Big Man Capone looking fresh. Thank you. There are also many costumes I can put on. Let's see if that's the right command. Might be, might not be. Oh Lord, I'm not ready. Let's see here. Oh, it's simply hat. One moment. There is a redeem that you can get if you get enough points to force me to change, but since we have so many new viewers, I feel comfortable giving everybody just a quick little peek of some of them. Here you can see we have the Tardy Cowboy, the Space Tardy Cowboy, the Tardy Father, the dapper grade, the tardy maid, and, for those of you in the know, the tardy Jane. However, I felt like starting things in a very mafioso way, so this is where we'll be for now. So, a quick warning. While I'll be going into all of these characters' backstories, that means there's going to be a lot of time for me talking. Well, neurons have been thoroughly activated? Hell yeah. I will let everyone know, since I am planning on going through my entire campaign through story times, every stream that I can manage them, some of these backstories are going to feel a bit vague, a bit mysterious, as certain details are not known to the other party members, people simply listening to my story time, and are secrets that have yet to be discovered about certain characters' backstories. I enjoy being a classy microanimal. Thank you, Pebble Walrus. So, I do apologize if some of these backstories seem a bit intentionally secretive. I will be saving to see you in maid outfit. That tends to be a popular one. I'll simply let you know now that most of this is on purpose, and that some secrets will be revealed in later story times, or perhaps in sessions that have not yet happened today. So, that leads me to my very last announcement before we get into our very first story time, and that is that all but one of my streams on Dungeons and Dragons have been archived here if anyone is so interested on catching up of any of my older story times, learning about my homebrew races and classes, magic items, how I built my world, or anything else I've talked about on stream. Please feel free to go check these out, as the VODs don't tend to last long. After all, the maid outfit is the most powerful. It is the most powerful form and must be kept safe. Now then, I believe we are almost ready. Yes, it looks like the announcements are done. The fire is lit and warm, and all we need to do is begin. However, simply because we have some excited people, I'm going to make sure to give everyone a fun little choice right now. Now, I'm about to give you an option in how to present these backstories. The first, as you can clearly see here, I will be in my corner with a little fireplace, and we'll have a map on screen that'll occasionally zoom in to locations I'm talking about. However, the map will mostly be static and simply a small reference. The other option is that we can expand this fire and make everything here a bit more cozy. However, that will mean the map will be gone. We will all simply have a fire on screen to relax to, and my voice to focus on. So, let's start today with this little poll on how you would like me to present the backstories. Would you like to see the maps, the locations, or keep everything peaceful with a nice roaring fire? Best go to voting. There's only 2 minutes to decide, and once that's done, we'll be rolling straight into the first story about a young man who calls himself Milo under the bridge. I'm a map man. I know what I like. Well, that's fair enough, Crazy Seth. I do enjoy my map and the effort I put into it, but I also know a lot of people might simply be here to listen or might enjoy the ambiance. Original maps are always fun to analyze. Well, thank you, Sour Cake. I believe in my very first stream, I talked about the tools I used, and I talked about this little deal here, which is made on, I think it's called Angzar's Fantasy Maps, which I absolutely love for a nation and city-state focused map. It has some shortcomings, but I enjoy it quite a lot. Make sure you get those votes on into the poll, as we only have 45 seconds remaining. But while we're waiting for the poll to finish, how's everyone doing? I'm glad to see some of my regulars, and I can already tell there's a few new folk here. Is everyone here from the Juniper stream? I'm surprised. I would imagine most of you would be off watching Takahata. I believe he's interviewing her right now. Or at least they're hanging out at his bar. Ah, yeah, perhaps. Okay. Ah, good to see a Subaru Forester here. The generic cruiser, yeah. Hmm. Well, I'm glad to see you've chosen to come and check me out. Always feel free to see the VODs, or go ahead to my archive. But it looks like we have chosen the map as our background for today's story time. So, with the setting fixed, the story's prepared, and our very first man of the hour set to go on his journey. Let us begin by zooming in to this northern region called the Greater Meadows, into the nation known as Borea, to its capital. For here is where we will tell the story of Milo under the bridge. Now, I will be telling you the fully available story and records of a man who goes by the name Milo under the bridge. And I must say go by, for that was not the name he was born with. Milo was in fact not born and under the bridge. That's not to say that he wasn't born under a bridge, or some clever trick of saying he was born at home or in a hospital of some form. Nor is this some simple halfling trick where, by some tradition, religious belief, or fanciful story, he gains a new name that all of the other members of the family might enjoy. No, this is to more simply say that Milo was not born to a family named Under the Bridge. He was in fact born Milo Brandowax. Thank you, Sour Cake, for the tier 1 sub. I do apologize if I don't catch all of those as the story gets going, but thank you nonetheless. Milo Brandowax was thus born in the capital of Borea. He was born to a relatively wealthy family, and a large one at that, the middle of 4 of the other siblings. We will have to cover a large family to understand a bit of Milo's life. Milo's mother was named Amranth. She was a priest within the community, and a very good one at that. Though she represented many different lawful and good gods of the region, she held a single church that brought all of their beliefs together, provided healing, comfort, and guidance to many members of the community. Truth be told, as she got on in her business, she would become a very influential person, made only more easily by her family's affluence. She would eventually grow to become probably the most highly earning member of her family, and most sought after by the community, though she did not begin this way. The family started instead with Milo's father, Pimpernel, an infamous bard who spent much of his early years adventuring around the entire world, getting into all sorts of scraps and misadventures. When Pimpernel eventually settled down with his wife, he had earned himself a very healthy amount of income and had a small treasury to sit on that would fund the family's beginnings in Borea and would lead to a very comfortable life for his children. Milo's eldest sibling was his brother, Wellaby, a good boy and a capable soldier who would later in his life go on to learn a bit of magic through wizardry, as there was always a spark of cleverness in the Brandowax family. Next is his eldest sister, Berlia,
She was also a very good person, though without the same spark. She ended up instead leading a large group of laborers and founding her own labor business within Borea. The middle child was thus Milo Brandoax, a boy with a panache for storytelling, likely inherited from his father, as he would later learn from his grandmother. The spark would be what set Milo on his path. Next in line is his younger brother, Bungo, a good young lad who, unfortunately, since his birth, suffered from ongoing sicknesses and remains at home dominantly unemployed. Finally, his youngest sibling, a young sister named Prumala, a character who had grown to resent some of her older siblings. She was never truly happy with being the youngest. Next, we will talk about his grandfather as he lives at home with the family. One Sancho Brandoax, an artificer, a man who spent his own early life gathered around adventurers, though never getting into scrapes himself. He specialized in the construction of magical items. It was through his interest in stories and adventuring days, though, that he met Milo's grandmother, the most infamous member of the Brandoax family. Milo's grandmother was in fact a great bard, and one who fell very heavily into the stereotype. She was known in her early years to be a rather promiscuous figure, one always interested in social lives and getting about with adventurers. It was no surprise to the family, then, when she did one day eventually leave, saying adventure had called for her. She did, though, send back regular correspondence and gifts to her grandchildren. However, she would never be fully within their lives, instead out about in the world. At a young age, Milo developed a very strong talent for storytelling, and this talent would eventually blossom into something deeper, as he would begin unlocking the secrets of bardcraft. Now, he did not fully understand it at the time, and as such, never sought out tutelage or influence from his father, or even less so his grandmother. This would cause his power to develop much like the emotions of a young child. Wild, uncontrollable, but fortunately lacking any true destructive weight. Secretly, his bardic powers would grow as his ability to tell stories would, and thus would come to a head on a dark day, well recorded by Borea's judges. It would be into his young adulthood that Milo would be introduced to a young man named Randall. Alone without a family, Randall had fled to the capital of Borea due to raids along the coast that had taken his home village from him. While Milo attempted to make friends with the boy, he was very bitter with his own life, and ended up resenting Milo's strong family and constant good-doing. He felt as if Milo was pitying him, looking down at him in some way, and this attitude would eventually lead the boys to frequent rows and arguments, which would culminate in our first official document from the judgment of the Borean High Council. It would seem at some point in his life, Milo was brought before the judges to face for a heinous crime. All records of the event are entirely hearsay or witness reports provided by those who happened to be nearby at the date of this event. On the day in question, Milo and Randall were seen engaging in a heated argument, both trading angry words as young boys are apt to. However, the argument would reach a head as Milo would begin uttering strange, dark mutterings under his voice, and eventually culminating in him telling Randall that he suggests the boy find the nearest bridge and jump off of it. The nearby witnesses would also report seeing odd glyphs and magical auras about Milo as he said these words. While the two boys were in a heated row, it is most strangely noted that immediately after stating this, Randall's eyes went cold, and his face cooled from its enraged state. He then turned and walked down the road to the nearest bridge, and looking down from the fall, about 10 to 15 feet, leapt from it, landing in the river below. All witnesses reported Milo seeming shocked at the event, and eventually running to the bridge. But that shock would turn to panic, as screams would be heard below. 2 days later, Randall's body would be trudged from the river, with clear signs of being attacked and drowned by a kelpie that had made its nest beneath that bridge. While efforts were made to remove all kelpies from the riverway after this point, Milo was brought on trial for the murder of the boy. After all witness accounts and several of his family's testimonials about the event, including a testimonial from his own father explaining the effects of the suggestion spell, it was found that neither boy thought at that time that jumping from the bridge would truly be a life-threatening case. And so Milo was cleared of all charges. The next record we have of Milo Brandowax is, however, another report made to the local guard. While many might think this seems to be the beginning of a dark pattern in Milo's life, it is instead a sadder thing, as this report was made by his family themselves, stating that the young man was missing from home. Upon investigation, it was found Milo had taken several of his belongings and all the money that he had saved up in his entire life, and had disappeared in the dead of night. No further records of Milo exist within Borea, though some small snippets can be found elsewhere. North of Borea, in the region known as the Northern Meadows, in a small unnamed village along a riverway, about 2 weeks after the reported missing of Milo Brandowax, a young halfling was found entering this village and requesting permission to live there. Without any available homes, the man would make himself home under a nearby bridge. The community here would take pity on the man and offer him what they could to help him build up his own home, many asking him why he would live beneath the bridge. The young boy would tell them that it felt better here, like he could better watch for danger. When they asked him his name, the man would call himself Under the Bridge. Milo Under the Bridge. All reports from this village state the man as being very reclusive and disinterested in social life, friendly when people could talk to him, but mostly tending to himself. He would only make one friend in his time in this village, a young mousekin by the name of Cabot Easthill. However, several years after they would become friends, Cabot would excuse himself from the village, joining up with an adventuring group, and leaving forever. It would only be a week later that Milo Under the Bridge would gather up his own belongings and head out of the village, stating he needed to prove that he was no longer afraid. Milo would thus pack everything he had into a small wagon and head far westward, looking for something new, something to prove. And he would only be stopped on the day that he looked up at a hill overlooking a battlefield and saw a strange Aarakocra, pure white, overlooking the field in pure rapture. Thus ends all known records or possible sightings of Milo Brandowax. While it is unknown whether Milo Under the Bridge is truly the same person, the coincidence here seems highly unlikely. I always admire people who can come up with fantasy names and languages. Well, thank you very much, Sobby Danny. A lot of this was actually invented by the player of Milo himself, though certain elements always come together. A degree of a lot of the nations named here are randomly generated, and a degree of them have been edited by me. However, should you stick around to the end, we might discuss the fantasy language I've been working on inventing, as I am a masochist who loves to inflict the most horrible of tortures upon myself. But yes, that is the backstory, or what we know about Milo under the bridge. It is unclear exactly what happened that day between Milo and Randall. All we have are the witness reports and some accounts that were officially submitted to judgment. As such, we can only speculate on what was intended on that day. Now then, though, we will move on to a character I'm certain all of you are excited for, and the one who stopped Milo in his tracks. A cleric, Aarakocra, known simply by the name Pharaoh, and in my campaign, played by a very popular moth. Yes, Pharaoh is Juniper's character, but do quiet down, as her story takes us a bit further back in time and farther away across the map, at least initially. In the world of Deorum, which you see before you, there is but one location that Aarakocra flock and have their own kingdom, and that is the mountains known as the Ananora, or by those who live on their surfaces or beneath them, the Ben-Nor Mountains. The Ananora have for all of history held the greatest concentration of Aarakocra, beneath a single monarchy ruled by their great queen. However, in a time long ago, nearly 2,000 years in the past, there was a large sect within the Ananora of religiously minded Aarakocra. They believed a catastrophe would face the world one day, that there were forces amongst the gods that held back a great coming event. This religious sect would seek traditional religious beliefs, dedications, a growth and blossoming of the belief and worship of the gods, those that they believed could influence these coming events. But as their belief in the gods and their worship of them drew attention away from the monarchy, they were eventually forced to abandon the Ananora Mountains and begin a pilgrimage to find a new home. Their pilgrimage would eventually take them far to the north, until they found the abandoned White Cliffs north of the meadows. Along the coast were massive white cliffs, nearly shorn with the shoreline, unclimbable by all those incapable of flight, and abandoned by all except the mightiest of beasts. Here, this religious group from the Ananora worked hard to settle and create a new home, which they would call Azka, and which remain entirely secluded from the rest of the world, which to them would grow to be known as the Lowlands. Secluded and bound by their religious traditions, their culture would grow and blossom into one entirely dedicated by their beliefs, their morals, and their ties to the gods. Within this system, two major sects would form, both made to entirely counter the old monarchy that they came from. The first were the matriarchs. Every female of this group of Aarakocra would be brought into a council of leaders whenever they should grow to motherhood. Thus would the power not be focused at one point, nor remain stagnated within one family. Instead, all of the matriarchs of every family would represent their thoughts, opinions, and desires for the nation, allowing a strong tradition of family traditional beliefs to grow and blossom. The second sect was that of the priesthood, made almost entirely of men. This group focused their entire lots on studying the wishes of the gods, of presenting their findings, creating the rituals necessary to stagnate a coming end and prevent it entirely in order to bless those of the lowlands. Within the strong religious and familial community would the young Aarakocra, Pharaoh Brightfeather, be born. Her birth in this isolated place would seep her psyche and her very personality in the thoughts of her community and their beliefs. Such, from the beginning of her life, it was filled with great irregularities and a very strong individual uniqueness. Her mother would break from the tradition of all matriarchs, which allowed the fathers to dote on the children during their rearing, and she would instead take special notice of her own daughter, Pharaoh, spending so much time as for Pharaoh to develop a strong admiration for her mother, one unseen before within the communities of Azka. However, in spite of her idolizing of her mother, the strangeness of her life would strike again. As she grew into her younger years, she would instead join the priesthood. One of the only females there, she would become tutelaged directly under her father. And it seems she took to this quickly and with great accolades, as almost every one of the major leaders of the priesthood would shower Pharaoh with strong support and belief that she was finding a strong path forward for all believers of the Azkin tradition. The final strangeness would strike then, as Pharaoh grew to be a great leader within the priesthood community. She would grow to be accoladed by all the males. A day would come when she would leave the cliffs of her home, seemingly forever, with great anger welling inside her, irritation at the past that seems to have driven her away from her home, or perhaps at the future she wishes to create. Pharaoh departs the Azkin cliffs and heads south and eastward alone. She would only stop in the nation of Tverfia, where she would stop upon a high hill and overlook a battlefield. She would watch the lowlanders slaughter each other in the thousands, and her beliefs would grow only stronger. Here, she would see the failures of her community and what awaits those without the protections and the blessings of the gods. Violence and slaughter without reason. Bloodshed, to what she saw as no end at all. All of these are, of course, reports that cannot be verified, things gleaned from what Farah herself has told, or things we could possibly learn if we were to speak with her community. Her life is a dark strangeness, something mysterious and in the past, something hidden in the cliffs of Azka. However, do not worry those who listen, and those who wonder. Who did the Azkins pray to? Why was Pharaoh left, or was she made to leave? Was as she hopes to do? And why would she join the priesthood if she so idolized her mother? These are all questions that are beginning to come to a head in the campaign and might begin to get answered in future story times. But for now, we must close the curtain on the story of Pharaoh and open it instead on a young wood elf by the name of Tortuga Locrine. Tortuga Locrine was a wood elf born in the small community of Osrin in southern Aethra. He lived with his small family, and they oversaw a small plot of land on which they had built a small church, praising the Lord of Sun, Pelor. He was born to his father Keir Locrine and his mother Eleanor Locrine, two older wood elves who had long ago left the traditional home of Ithoriel. While there would be times that him and his younger brother Pharyngian Locrine would ask them about their wooded past, their parents never speak much on it, instead focusing them on studying Pelor, seeing to the beehives, or having fun with their childhoods. As Tortuga grew in his idyllic life, there would be a point when he would eventually join the Aethroni military, as required for a 2-year levy. He would join as a scout along the southern border and serve out his time avoiding most open combats, only engaging in a few skirmishes. He would eventually return home to Osrin with this experience under his belt, though glad to be done with the war and excited to return to his family and younger brother. However, it would only be 2 years later when tragedy would strike the city of Osrin. Of this, we know the stories he tells, that his memories are filled with the dark, black, acrid smoke, blood, a haze. He remembers it all too vividly and finds himself in pain with each time he thinks back. He could barely recognize his father's face as his severed head laid at his feet, the men around him laughing as he picked up the necklace with the blood-soaked symbol of Pelor upon it. Tortuga would be taken from his village, him and his brother, the only survivors. They would be traded southward into slavery. Taken down through Aethron, they would eventually reach the border, and here bags would be placed over their head as they are taken into a small city-state of Scarin to be held overnight. Tortuga could remember the smell of hay and manure in the place that he was held. He could remember the men talking of the businesses they ran here. And the next morning, him and his brother would be taken, along with many other slaves, and secretly traded further south again. He would remain blinded until the day that they reached the coast. Here, Tortuga and his brother would be unmasked finally, their entire route having taken them several weeks of being in a completely blinded state. Along the coastline, they would see several ships of Scarpi raiders, famed figures that would raid all the coasts of the world, stealing away treasure, slaughtering peasants, and taking slaves to the far-flung corners of the world that still legally traded in life. Here the slaves would be separated into 2 groups. Those declared spoiled would be sent to the Benor Mountains to work for the dark dwarves that live there, Tortuga and his brother Pharyngian, though, would be taken eastward, traded down the coast, all the way into the Ostrostian Empire, into the kingdom of Kron. They would be traded into the employ of a dark, vampiric master named Ichabod. A torturous life Tortuga would spend here, in a near constant state of pain, either by whipping, manual labor, or being required to feed Ichabod or those other vampiric lords he would entertain from time to time. Tortuga's life would become a hell for those 2 years, until the day he was brought before Ichabod and informed his brands would be changed, as he's been selected to be sent to the capital of Oskrostia, to be placed into the slave arenas where he would fight to death. However, on this day, perhaps fortune would smile or frown on Tortuga, as forces would march into Ichabod's territory to cleanse the vampiric influence here. The Winvernian troops marched across the fields, slaughtering all servants and vampires they encountered, only letting Tortuga go, as he could prove that he was an unwilling slave. As the troops separated him, he looked back at the mansion now burning, and saw a single wagon leaving, driven by Ichabod's men. He saw in the cart his brother chained, being taken further eastward and deeper into the vampiric empire. To this date, Tortuga has never seen his brother again. Tortuga would spend months then traveling northward and westward, slowly trying to make his way home to Athrone. However, he would be stopped one day in Zesha. Many refugees from the war with the vampires would settle here for a time, as the Zishan monks were always willing to provide food and shelter. Here, though, a man would approach Tortuga and speak to him of a monastery hidden in the dark places of Zesha that might take the boy in and teach him the ways that he would need to survive in the world. Tortuga would follow this man and enter this mysterious monastery under the tutelage of a sensei named Gasha. The sensei would teach him of the 3 tenets of their monastery: stealth, education, and reaction. Preemption. These were the cornerstones that made up the beliefs of this monastery, and what Gasha attempted to teach him. Though Tortuga was filled with such rage and impatience, he would eventually earn himself the nickname Master of Meditation, as Gasha would find himself frequently having to send the boy to hours of meditation before he would be calm enough to truly learn the techniques needed. Eventually, Tortuga would tell his sensei that he needed to go, that there are things he needed to do in the world, and though he appreciated everything here, he could not stay. Gasha would not hold the boy against his will, but gave him parting words and a parting gift. The masters of our order lie in every stick, stone, and spring of the monastery, and I hope their teachings will guide you to peace. But thus, Gasha presented Tortuga a pure black quarterstaff, one of the special items the monastery would give to their disciples. And tell Tortuga he hoped it would guide him to peace. Tortuga would take the quarterstaff then, and begin returning home, only stopping in the city-state of Scaran. And from there, his story in the campaign begins. To learn more of that, I'm afraid, you'll have to go to the archive and watch the beginnings of my current campaign. Now then, that seems like a good point for us to call a quick recess. How is everybody doing? What do you think of our first three characters here? Milo, Pharaoh, and Tortuga, and how they all seem to be heading, incidentally, towards Scarin. Dark pasts seem to hold on to many characters here, some darker than others, some more confusing, really. But all of them, I hope, are entertaining, to say the least. So, I'm going to take a minute to drink a bit of water and ask how everybody's doing, how you're enjoying the story time, and so far, who's been your favorite character? I do hope you are all still with me and that my voice has not put anyone to sleep. I am good, and they seem like a fun bunch. They're certainly a very fun and influential group of Wood Bogus. I said it once, and I'll say it again. Junie's character looks like Lord Shen from Kung Fu Panda 2. That is probably not an entirely accidental influence. Oh my god. Blinty boy, thank you so much for the gifted subs. How are you doing? I have to assume you're enjoying the story time. I could kind of tell which one of them Junie made just based on the art. Oh, well, that's very interesting. The truth is, she did all of the artwork for everyone who isn't Milo here. Milo's artwork I may have stolen. Oh! Thank you for resubbing! And welcome back, Lightbringer. Alrighty then. I hope everybody's good and relaxed. Thank you for the follow. Lords above, everyone's very excited for the recess. I'm a sucker for eloquent talk such as yours, and also D&D. Glad to hear it, glad to hear it. Oh shit, thank you for the sub. God, these are all going a little crazy for me. I'm trying to catch up here. Let's see. Yeah, that looks to be everything is in place. Now then, we'll go ahead and begin with probably one of the cutest at first glance characters. As we begin to discuss another dark backstory. That I'm a sucker for it. And also made tardigrade. Alright. I know nobody's redeemed it yet, but since there's such a popular demand, and I hope it'll bring everybody's focus back to the story. There we are. And I think it's a little suiting for the next character. Yep, so be Danny. So, now we will discuss the small Genasi girl, known simply as Malachite. No records of Malachite's birth seem to exist. The very first discovery of any reference to her would be within a Pulamont orphan house located along its western border. The references here all speak of a young green girl brought at a very infantile age. Now, I should warn you though, Pulamont is one of the nations that still legally practices the business of slavery, and thus their orphan houses tend to be something a bit darker in purpose. Instead, being a place where people are trained, either for manual labor or household chores, at a very young age, to serve Pulamonti nobles someday in the future. Hey, this outfit is not fake at all. I wear it whenever I can, and do not appreciate such slander. She was held in an orphan house owned by a man named Tertius Paskin, a very astute businessman with a cruel panache for the efficient training of slaves. Malachite's memories before the orphan house are hazy at best. She was only an infant before she was sold there, and even some of her earliest memories here are foggy. Holy shit, Al Frost. I said I didn't want to break stories, but I have to say thank you for the 50 gifted subs, my dude. God, Hall Frost, the goddamn pimp. Every time, every time. I'm going back into the story. Please, everyone, restrain from the insanity until a good stopping point. Her life within the orphanage was one of basic hardship. She was submitted to arduous training to become a household slave. Her unique color and small stature made her uniquely suited to be a slave within a noble house. However, her clunky movements and lack of apparent coordination with cleaning, cooking, or any other basic servitude made her needed to be thoroughly and severely punished. I'm going to have to mute this for a second, I believe. Oh, that did not do it. Let's see here. Apologies as I try to fix this for just one sec. Malachite is very small. She in fact has a unique feature granted to her, as all my characters do, that allow her to alter her age, or not her age, her size, over the course of about a week. So, she can actually set herself to be several different sizes if she so chooses, and over the course of the campaign has grown as large as 6 foot tall for some events, and has shrunk herself down to being close to 4 feet for other. She tends to enjoy, though, being on the cuter side of things. Trained in the house, she was held under the watchful eye of the head lady, who was a shrewd and bullying woman, often punishing her for every small slight. Malachite's only relief was her one other young friend, a boy named Ajax, who knew as little of his past as she did. Where Malachite lacked grace and charm, Ajax was pleasing to talk to, and knew how to commit the most dexterous of deeds. He specialized in cleaning and eavesdropping, charming and deceiving. Malachite seemed to lack any real talent, save for one. The impressive knife work she could display in the kitchen was her one saving grace. She was a savant when it came to the carving of large beasts and other succulents that could be presented at a table, and thus she was often brought forth and displayed whenever large roasts or great gatherings were made at Parkin's place. It was thus no surprise to the household when Malachite was brought before Tertius Parkins, as he went to entertain a group of military leaders from Polemont. He had invited them to their home and displayed before them a mighty roasted beast. Malachite was brought into the dining room and presented on a large chair. She stepped before it, holding the massive two-handed blade between her hands. She began her work on the beast. However, unbeknownst to her, sat at this table was a very important man. A man by the name Felix Augustus. He was a general in charge of Polemont's 5th Legion, thus making him one of the 10 most influential figures outside of the Emperor himself. Malachite's carving caught this Augustus's attention as he watched her deft hands and shocking strength as she worked the large blade through this particularly tough meal. His pure blue eyes began to pierce her as he judged her capabilities. Malachite would glance up for but a moment and become lost in his light blue gaze that seemed to pierce straight through her. This would sadly lead her to an unfortunate mistake, sending a particularly succulent piece of the meat scattering across the table and landing in Felix's lap, staining his clothes and embarrassing Parkins in front of his guests. Parkins would apologize profusely and immediately move to punish this unruly slave, seeking only Felix's Augustus's forgiveness for this unfortunate slight. Felix would, however, slowly applaud the young girl's movements and approach Parkins, saying, as the girl was clearly displeasing to him, Felix would be more than happy to take her off his hands, and of course not charge the man for the ruining of his clothes. Parkins, uncertain about this. Losing a slave was a costly endeavor, but to receive the thanks and influence that it going to a man such as Felix, he nodded in agreement, saying of course Felix could take her. Thus Malachite was taken away from the orphan house and placed under the command of Felix Augustus, one of the slaves within his retinue. He would bring her back to the Legion and immediately set about training her in the art of scout work, rangery, combat, and all the brutalities of a war. She would take to this work quite quickly, shockingly fast, in fact, to the point that no one would question the strange small girl that Felix had chosen to be trained as his personal ranger. Sometime in the future, Felix would in fact return to this orphanage and bring back Malachite's only friend, Ajax, who she had had to leave behind. But where Malachite excelled in the rough and tumble world of the military, Ajax floundered. Where she grew tough in the environments and learned to rough it, he struggled outside of households and without people to convince or to sneak upon. Where Malachite took to archery and combat, Ajax fell back on his older ways, trying to find every advantage he could before ever engaging in a fight. It thus was no shock to anyone when Felix first called Malachite into his tent and informed her that she would be trained under the head ranger of the Legion and would be expected to raise herself up to the station of one of the most renowned of the enslaved forces within his retinue. She would go on a secret mission alongside this ranger and learn everything she could, and be expected to be performing at the same level when she returned. Malachite accepted this job gladly. She would miss the event of Ajax going into the tent after her, also to speak with Felix. She would also not be there as Ajax would leave, utterly distraught and seething with anger. Malachite would be looking up at his face in confusion and horror days later, as all the other members of this ranger party laid slaughtered around her. Ajax had crept up on the group in the dark of night. He had poisoned the guard and killed the other two rangers in their sleep. And when Malachite had awoken, he had beaten her within an inch of her life. As he leaned into her ear, he would tell her, "You will live by my choice. I am the only reason you are alive." Ajax would then take the secret parcel the Master of Rangers had hidden away and disappear to the dark, leaving Malachite to crawl her way back to Felix to explain all that had happened. For years, Malachite would remain one of Felix's most important rangers, and for years she would be looking over her shoulder as twice more in her life Ajax would surprise and beat her. He grew to be a constant shadow that she could jump at. It was until the day that a strange dwarf arrived in camp and was given a task by Felix to spy in the nearby city-state of Scarin. As Malachite sat by Felix listening to the job, Felix would slowly turn to her and say, "Malachite, you will be accompanying this Rasmussen on his job. While I do trust him, I believe the two of you will be able to most easily cover for each other's shortcomings and enhance each other's strengths." Unquestioning in her servitude and loyalty to this man who had saved her from a life at the orphanage and had given her everything she had, Malachite bowed and said her eyes were Felix's. She left the tent with the strange dwarf, heading northward to Scarin. She wondered what her life might have going forward. Now, of course, at this point, I believe we can all see who must be discussed next. The dwarf fighter of the party, sporting a rather unique name at that. A man who seemed to have only showed up at the very end of this gathering in Scarin. The Benor dwarf named Rasmussen Granite-Hide. As all dwarves of his ilk were, Rasmussen Granite-Hide was born in the Benor Mountains to the infamous race of dwarves known as the Benor. They were known for the dark works that they did, but more importantly, for the enchanted metal their minds produced. Named, of course, the Benor metal, this tougher than steel material was unique in its ability to almost inhale enchantments and store them permanently. While not as tough as the famous, I believe it is Grumdir metal of the northern dwarves, which could resist the hardest strikes, Benor metal was tough but almost inherently magical, granting it the ability to hold any number of properties, and thus making it far more valuable than the tougher steel of the northern dwarves. Rasmussen himself, though, was born to a barely influential family. The Granite-Hides were very small within the Benor communities, and only ever trusted with guard duties and providing protection for some of the lesser minds of the mountains, kept out of any real circles. The Granite-Hide patriarch, Rasmussen's own father, would fight his entire life to grow the family's prestige and fame. Thus, it would come to pass that Rasmussen knew that he would have to live up to his father's expectations, and always strived to be the pride of the Granite-Hide family. Where many of his brothers or sisters went to guard duties in the different mines around, Rasmussen bided his time, waiting for the position that he knew would bring actual renown and provide his family the chance to grab at real influence in these dwarven communities. The day would eventually come that he was called into his eldest sister's office She stood as the most influential of the Granite Hides outside of his father at this stage, and it seems she had used all of her knowledge, know-how, and every favor she had built in her life up to this point to secure the Granite Hides the opportunity they needed. Rasmussen's father would turn to him in that small, dark office and tell his son that they had secured a position unheard of for one of their influence, and that Rasmussen would become one of the drivers within the greatest mine that the Benor had. A place simply called the Well. In that moment, Rasmussen looked at his father, for never before had his father looked at him with such hope, such pride, and such happiness. Rasmussen set himself ready to make his father proud and to bring the greatest renown possible to the Granite Hides, elevating them to a true place within the Benor Dwarves. The Well is the darkest mine of the Benor Dwarves. And I mean this not by light nor by depth, though both do make the deepest recesses of it dark, even to those equipped to see and such. The Well is dark, for its construction and methodology are horrors to the slaves brought within it. Every season, hundreds of thousands of slaves are brought into this massive well of a mine, miles in diameter, going straight down into the earth, ringed by a spiraling path large enough for 3 wagons abreast to drive. This well seems to dig deep into the very heart of the earth, in the place from which all Benor reserves are removed. Massive meteorite-sized chunks of the metal are pulleyed up over the course of months and swung into the massive skyscraper-sized smelters built into the sides of this deep, dark mine. To keep it going, the Benor consume a seemingly ceaseless number of slaves brought from all over the world, their dark efforts leading to almost 100% death rates over the course of each mining season. Thus, Rasmussen would work this mine for near 100 years. Each season, he would, as every other driver does, bring a new crop of 12 slaves into the mines. And at the end of the season, he would walk out, making his family obscenely wealthy and bringing up the chains that were left of the long since deceased slaves. Over his long time as a driver, he would slowly work his way to being placed lower and lower in the mines, bringing back greater wealth, influence, and prestige, until eventually the name Granite Hide would begin to be known amongst the more influential circles of the dwarven families. Until one unfortunate day, Rasmussen, having just finished whipping an unruly slave back into work, would take a breather and wipe the sweat from his brow. Looking across his chain gang, he would see one man had separated himself from the slaves and looked down into the dark, seemingly infinite well to its very core. The man would turn and make eye contact with Rasmussen. And in that moment, Rasmussen knew he would be too late to stop what happened next, as the man leapt from the cliffside and fell miles deep into the darkness. This, of course, was an inexcusable mistake for any of the drivers. The deepest part of the mines was where the metal was extracted, and any object falling that distance would reach terminal velocity before reaching the bottom, gravely endangering the drivers and the workers below who worked to extract this valuable metal. As such, Rasmussen was put on a probation and a hefty fine placed on his family for his failure to keep his slaves in line. Him making this grave mistake shook him. The debt his family took on shook him. His father's anger and disappointment in him shook him. But the look on that slave's face, one of sheer joy and relief as he stepped from the edge, shook Rasmussen to his core. Thus, Rasmussen would choose a voluntary exile from the Ben Or Mountains and his family. He would head out from the mountains northward, seeking anywhere else to exist, to cope, to find work to drown himself in. First, he would settle in the Papani Mountains amongst the gnomes that made life here. He would work them for near decades, creating a relationship with the gnomes, learning of their history, before eventually heading even further northward into Pulamont. Here he would work as an adventurer and mercenary, eventually building up a relationship with one of their legionary generals, a man named Felix Augustus, until the day he was given a job that would send him to the city-state of Scarin, alongside a very strange girl named Malachite. Thus we end the tale of Rasmussen. And also need to take a moment. I do apologize, everybody, but I am afraid I am full to bursting and we'll need to take a quick bathroom break. Please, when I come back, though, tell me how everyone is doing. How are you enjoying story time? I understand this is a bit longer of a story session than I normally do, so I hope it is staying entertaining throughout. I would also like to hear some of your own backstories, some of the ones you're most proud of, or some of the most interesting you've heard before. And as we move forward, keep in mind there will be a poll at the end to start piecing together who so far has been your favorite backstory. Now then, I'll be back in less than a minute, do not worry. I just need a quick bathroom break, and we'll get back into our last two stories of the evening. All right. I am back. Let's see here. Undercooked track. My friends have left me to charge a little after you started streaming, so I'm somewhat sad but this distracts me from my sadness. I'm glad to hear it, Undercooked Trash. And how is everyone else doing? I understand this is a bit of a longer stream, but don't know anything about D&D, but you make it sound fun. I'm glad I make it sound fun. And Random Fish, I highly recommend checking out any of the streams I have archived or any of my VODs on D&D. I always strive to make it an entertaining experience, while also explaining some of the homebrew stuff I've done. Doing good. Your voice is wonderful. Oh my god. Thank you so much, Greek Tempest. I honestly really, really love compliments about my voice. I think, as most people know, whenever you hear your own voice, you have to cringe and scream and seek comfort, as everyone's voice sounds absolutely dreadful to themselves. And so I have a very negative personal impression of how my voice sounds. But honestly, when people listen to me for a couple of hours and say they're still not sick of it, I get super excited. Drinking after trash day at work, your voice soothes my soul. No homo. No homo, of course. I understand, Hal Frost. Though you are free to go as hard as you want after the 50 gifted subs. Thank you. You're really good at storytelling? Thank you, Sour Cake. If you want to know, I actually did drama all from elementary school into high school. And so I have an advantage of having a lot of improv experience and stage experience, though I'm glad you appreciate how all that comes out now. And hey there, what is that? ZZ? Sheezy? I'm gonna need probably some help to describe like how to actually say that, but thank you so much for the 1 bit. I love little bit wars. Do you have a character that you're proud of? I have made a lot of characters in my time, especially as I end up DMing a lot and not getting a chance to really play out a lot of my characters. I have probably too many saved up that I have not really gotten a chance to play, or not gotten a chance to play a lot. So there are some I'm more or less proud of. Honestly, though, if people enjoyed this sort of backstory type session, I might be convinced sometime in the future to instead go over some of the backstories of characters I've invented. But today, we're focusing in on those in the party. So, at this point, I think is a good time to discuss a quick thing. While we have not reached that point in the story yet, of this lineup you see before you, Milo has actually left my current party. There was a time where he felt the need to depart from the group and their influence on his life, and chose to settle down in Corella, working as a bit of a diplomat and busybody within some of the more noble communities there. And the player has actually now come around with their new character, and thus begins the tale of our last 2 characters, those who joined later in the campaign. The first we will discuss is Valandria, one of my player's second characters. After that, we will discuss the last joiner to my campaign, Perch. I feel that I'm basically a forever DM for my friends, so whenever I get a chance to make a character, I go hard on the backstory and stuff. Hell yeah. I have found myself actually experimenting with backstories at this point, where I spent one backstory I made for a warlock, spending 90% of the backstory just describing his patron, and barely had any words about the character himself. I made one backstory where it started off basically like a series of haiku poems that, as the character changed from the beginning to the end, broke down from haikus to a series of single sentence descriptions into long paragraphs talking on and on about what's happening as the man shifted from a very fantasy-esque beginning to a very dark and realistic present. And maybe sometime in the future we'll get to discuss that. But if I can have everyone's attention, everyone's relaxed calmness, we now move in to our second to last backstory. That of the high elf wizard Valandria. Valandria Anastasia was born in the very noble nation of Abel. Here, communities of different nobles, or those who have played themselves as nobles, live in a constant state of showing off to one another. Fanciful palaces, large groups of highly skilled retainers. It is no wonder that her mother made a position for herself within the Cantabella family as a very skilled retainer. And Valandria, from the day she was born, was expected to one day become the same. It felt like it was the very age she began to walk that her mother began to train her, both in the arts of magic, but more importantly, in the dueling arts. Her mother was a cunning and deliberate swordswoman, and had no wonder remaining about how she had claimed the position as the head guard of the Cantabella family, but also as one of their most famed duelists. All of the teachings in Valandria's life came from her nanny, a shrewd woman who was mean to her core and seemed to take some pleasure in being able to punish a higher retainer's daughter whenever she made mistakes. However, it was during one of these sessions of being explained what small courtesy or gesture that Valandria had failed to make, that Valandria copied a gesture she had seen her mother make whenever she was angry, and accidentally cast her first firebolt directly into the nanny's face. Her mother would of course come to her rescue in a very interesting form. Valandria's mother would descend on the woman and through extreme pressure force the nanny into an early resignation from the household, sending her off, and instead taking all of her daughter's tutelage under her own wing. Thus, every aspect of Valandria's life was under the control of her mother. Her days were spent learning dueling, learning magic, learning how to behave in a court, learning ceaselessly under her nearly inexhaustible mother. Eventually, when she felt enough of a baseline has been set, her mother would send Valandria away to the elven city of Corella, the capital of Aethen, where she would be enlisted into the College of Magic and begin her formal education into becoming a wizard. Here, Valandria would eventually make friends with other elves here, sent from many different backgrounds and teachings. Yoleli, Cynthia, and Hannah would all grow close together, all of them sharing a fascination with the arts of transmutation, though Valandria would often dip away, looking into every school she could. It would be a dark day some decades in the future, still enrolled at the college, that Valandria would have her first encounter with a mysterious drug occasionally passed around the college. A dark material in the form of these black beads, simply called Zolflex. They were rumored to enhance a caster's ability to insane degrees, but to rob all essence of control from them. Always the adventurer willing to try something once, Valandria gave the Zolflex a try and found herself falling excitedly into that feeling of power. Thus, when the door shocked her awake from a momentary stupor, she turned about and cast Firebolt at an insane power at whoever had dared to enter her domain. Thus, the magic spell went wide, nearly catching her friend Yoleli in its crossing. Realizing what she had done and seeing the fear and panic in her best friend's face, Valandria fled from Corella. Not looking back, she stole away from the college in the middle of the night, telling no one where she was going, fleeing in fear of the school's wrath, of her shame, of her friends' fear. She would flee ceaselessly, heading southward along the roads, until she would end up in the swamp city of Mordom, the place where it is said that all bards would go. A plank city built upon stilts in the middle of the deep swamp, filled with music and magic. No rules or teachers or assignments, simply wild parties, drinking, and the night music all about them. Valandria found herself falling in love with the city and would stay here for years. It would only be after a time spent working and living in an inn that all of the funds and support from her mother would eventually run dry, and she would begin to realize what she had done. Run away from the school her mother had sent her without word, spent every cent she had brought in the city of bards, having never told anyone what she was doing. She knew she had to leave, but could not find it in herself to return home. Instead, she would move in slow spurts, next ending up in the cities of light. Here she would hire herself out to adventuring groups seeking artifacts and lost ruins. She would also fight the raiders that occasionally came across the borders and from the sea. But the churches and libraries of the cities of light would steal away all artifacts, giving very little pay. And the raiders seemed to come ceaselessly. One day, as Valandria looked down at the young face of the 16-year-old girl that had come to raid this land, she lost all taste and desire to remain here. So she would move again, ever closer to home. She would head northward into Pulamont. Here she would find the fighting coliseums, more to her taste. Everyone here skilled and willing to fight. Here she would bring her mother's teachings of dueling and magic to the forefront, until the day she met a man named Evanar. A high elf like her, this man fought in a style so reminiscent of her mother, yet unlike anything she had seen before. He seemed to present himself a drunken fool, always inebriated, yet somehow he would dance about the arena in a blur, unfocused, dashing, unable to be caught. Valandria would approach this man and demand he teach her how he fought. And through constant pressure, eventually, Evanar would agree to teach her, under the agreement that she would first duel him, and that she would not seek magical healing for what happened. And she would need it, though, as at the end of the duel she had been beaten completely and thoroughly by Evanar. And he said the wounds would help her, remind her of the weakness she currently had. She would keep her pride bitten deep down as she followed Evanar, as he would take her far from where she had been going, to the ancient Authorial Valley, where the teachings of the elves take root. Here, Evanar would teach her of his method of magic and dueling, which he called blade dancing. He told her of the many different schools of blade dancers that the ancient elves had, and made sure to hone her in his own practice. The longer his teachings went on, the more they seemed to take on a religious overtone, the more the morals of these schools came to the forefront and the ancient traditions seemed to be highlighted. Valandria worked hard to parse these out of the actual technique. She had always been more technically minded in such ways. So, it would come as an interesting moment when Evanar eventually declared that she had all the basics down, and now was her last ritual, the sign that she had become an official trainee in his school. She would take on the dark, flowing tattoos meant to simulate the movements of the Displacer Beast, the symbol of the school Evanar had taught her. She gladly bore these tattoos. While they had some religious or ritualistic meaning, she more saw them as a warning to all who would face her, that she knew an ancient method that even her mother did not. The next morning, as Valandria would return to Evanar, hoping to find him and ask him his opinion on her own past, she would find the hovel he had lived in entirely empty. No sign of Evanar anywhere. It seems he had disappeared completely, leaving no word or hint of where he had gone. Irritated, Valandria would spend some time honing her skills alone in the valley, until the time that a letter from one of her friends Euleli reached her, calling her back to Corella, saying something had happened to their friend Hannah, and that she needed Valandria to save her. Valandria would return to Corella to find that another group had already taken up this job. A strange group, including many figures we have learned about today. And so here we call curtain on Valandria's backstory and move ourselves on to the very last step, the last character to join. A man, a mystery, a dark character playing my homebrewed class of Shade. Perch Kurama. But before we get to him, I will take another moment as I am reaching the absolute straining point. So I must first prepare myself a drink. Oh. How is everybody out there now that we are approaching the end? I see I have a couple of my party members in chat today. Lotus and Juniper, I see you are there. Valandria turned into a dragon. Oh, of course. Rip Valandria went to Bard Heaven. Cheers. That better be a Dr. Pepper? Hell no, Hal Frost. My one and only addiction. Diet Coke. I know. How cliche of me. But I can't help it. It's so smooth on my tongue. Valandria seems to be the most interesting so far. Is that true, Sour Cake? Certainly. As a several 100-year-old elf, I'd say she has a bit of advantage on most of the party. Though she has always endeavored to live an adventurous and exciting life, I cannot argue with that. Who the fuck are you, Matt Pat? Hey, fuck you, Hal Frost. More than Matt Pat drinks Diet Coke. And you're down for Malachite? Yeah, she does have a very interesting backstory, though a much more interesting character when you get to interact with her. Now then, I'm feeling a bit refreshed, a bit excited, and ready to close your loving Tortuga. Well, just hold on, because we'll have ourselves a little poll at the end, one that I'm certain my party will be very excited to see. So, now then, where to begin the story of Perch Kurama? And hello to you, Thundercluck9. Nice name. Yes, I believe here is the only reasonable place to begin the story of Perch. In eastern Akralangi, at the foot of a tall mountain, there lied a simple village, nestled comfortably, if poorly, in the mountain's wake. On one sunny spring morning, a pair of men named Sprig and Leek made their way up the mountain. They had seen men going up and down here before, and though these two were not the adventurous type, they were filled with a curiosity of what might lie up the mountain way that so many traders in the past had gone. Partway up the mountain, though, the men stop as they hear a distant clatter of stone being overturned by a heavy foot thunk, followed by a violent rustling of a nearby bush. Both men draw their daggers and turn towards it to see a large metallic creature writhing about in the shrub, seemingly unable to fully control its limbs. The being looks up at them with a face reminiscent of that of a man, but sharp and metallic in appearance. The men, knives out, approach this fantastical creature, as one of them says, "Looks like a living statue." "Aye, statue," replied the trapped figure. They were enchanted by this creature. It could speak, and yet it seemed made of metal. Leek, realizing the value of enchanted metals in the form of a creature that could speak, began to formulate a plot. The duo thus would lead the creature down the mountainside, back to the village, and to the smith that lived here. They would ask him how much they could get for selling the smith this entire fantastical creature made of enchanted metals. The smith, however, would be taken aback, asking the men where they found this thing. The smith had encountered glimpses and rumors of them on his own journeys to the mountain top, where he often could trade for some valuable metals. He, however, had unfortunate news for them. As the smith explained, that this figure was so unique and made of such a valuable metal that no one anywhere would be able to offer them an accurate price for it, even if they went so far south as to speak to the nobility of Longi. They could only ever receive a fraction of what this creature was actually worth. Their plan shattered at their feet, the two took the creature back to their own home and left it outside as they went in to plot to come up with a way that they could still make themselves rich off of this, even if they had to sell themselves short. Left on his own, the creature looked about the yard he had been left in and watched as the wild birds of the forest began to roost and hunt for food about him. They could not sense the life within this seeming statue, and so felt no fear to begin nestling about his feet, seeking out worms or lost seeds. So enraptured was Perch that he did not hear nor notice the figure creeping up on him, until the moment that the young girl declared, "They seem to like you." Perch was caught off guard, not so much as the birds, though, that whipped about and flew off into the forest. Perch turned around and looked at the girl as several of the birds returned to him and landed on his helmet, or his head, and on his metallic shoulders. They seemed to roost here, feeling protected by the creature that faced this girl. "The birdies like me?" the creature asked. Something still felt off while speaking. His mouth wasn't yet accustomed to it. They sure do, mister. Hey, are you a knight? You've all that big heavy armor on, and you're not from town. The creature felt more and more concepts suddenly rushing into his mind, like he was remembering them as the girl spoke. Knight. I don't know what I am. The girl seemed confused as well. What you are? You don't know, mister? Did you forget or something? What's your name? The creature was absolutely lost, looking about, looking around. Then a voice called from the cabin as the girl's mother yelled to her, "Ginger, get away from that thing!" Leek and Sprig came running from their home as they explained to the woman that they had found this creature high up on the mountain, and they were coming up with a plan on what to do with her. However, concerned with the danger, the trio began to argue with one another, pointing at the creature they would return into the house in order to conceal their words from him. After a long and grueling debate, the three decided to keep the creature behind the house until they figured out what to do with it exactly. During the next few days, the creature never moved from its spot. Not due to any restraint, but simply because it could not think of where else to go. And it had many concepts that had been told about that it needed to mull over in its own mind. After 3 days of silence and stillness, the young girl snuck out to visit him again. "So, you're just armor then, mister? Mama and Papa said that you were weird and cursed or something, but the birdies really seem to like you, so you can't be that bad." The creature roused itself from its stasis. Looking about, it noticed birds were still lounging about on its body, seemingly comforted by their new nest. They must seem to like perching on something so big and... His sentence ended abruptly as he looked down at himself. Then he smiled, a strange, rigid smile. "Mr. Armor Man, do you remember something? Do you have a name or know what you are?" "I have remembered much of the world and its workings while listening to you and your family, but nothing of myself." The girl did seem ecstatic that the large armor began to speak with her again, and that he seemed to be understanding more and more about himself. "Well, if you don't know your name, then do you mind if I call you Perch? Just like the birdies seem to." Newly christened with a name, Perch was content. It wasn't anything familiar to him, but it was better that way. A new name for his new mentality. Perch and the girl would thus spend many nights talking with each other, as Perch would try to absorb as many concepts of the world as he could through what the girl spoke. This world and its squishy people are not new to me, but I am new to myself. Something happened on top of that mountain, and I can't fathom it, so I have to go back. There's something I'm missing here, and I feel it in my... Perch looked down at his body and realized that heart wasn't the right word, and that troubled him. Soul. Yes, metal I may be, but I am confident in my soul. Perch continued his musings about his existence for a while, and then began to test his body, gaining a much better feel for it. Perch found Ginger at her window one day. While she was unhappy he was leaving, after they had started to bond, he promised to her that he would return. once he had discovered what he needed from the mountaintop. And thus, in the dead of night, the statue walked from that house's backyard, up the mountain. Inside himself, there was a strong feeling of annoyance. That was the best feeling that this thing inside him could describe. It was trapped in this ungangly, unruly form. Watching this thing, or whatever it was, in charge of itself, running his casket. The girl was nice to them, but she only knew of the one controlling everything, not of the secret, dark annoyance within him. What am I doing here? That thought began to form. I think I know who I am. I'm more than this thing, but I'm not me. Why am I here? This thought began to reach itself backwards into itself, finding memories, a job it was doing, a name, someone he was supposed to steal from. That was his bread and butter, after all. Kurama. That was my name. I was the greatest thief who ever existed. Why am I trapped in some sort of... Perch felt a strange sensation in his chest. The further up the mountain he got, the more it began to bubble there, the more annoyed it felt, the more it lashed out at its casket. What feeling was this? Perch thought. Never mind that. The peak is close. I should find what I'm looking for. Perch ended his trek up the mountain, increasingly uneasy in his mind, but more at ease with his body. It began to feel more natural to him. Here at the peak were the ruins of what had happened. Who the hell does he think he is? I am Kurama, the greatest thief this world has known. No prison will hold me. I have killed for lesser reasons than this. Why does he think I won't do the same to him? Fury grew in Perch's chest, a fury he did not understand. There has to be a way out. There is always a way out. Perch observed the ruins around him. It seems that there had once been some sort of small temple here, open to the air, but shattered apart now. It was hard to understand what happened, as everything here seemed destroyed, like lightning or the fury of the gods had smote everything on the mountaintop. From behind him, Perch heard a voice calling, that big bastard is. As he turned about, he saw Leek and Sprig running up to him, Leek dagger drawn, fury in his eyes. I knew that bitch wouldn't watch this thing. It seems the duo had left the watching of Perch to the mother, and she had noticed his leaving in the middle of the night. Leek, he's clearly alive. We can't just sell him piece by piece. He could talk, for God's sake. You think of that idiot, set for life for just a bit of handiwork. Perch began to understand. The two men, Sprig and Leek, were discussing carving him apart and selling him piece by piece to the highest bidder. Leek seemed the most gung-ho for tearing him apart, while Sprigg still just wanted to sell him at a loss in one piece, while he still wanted to make a fortune. He didn't want to kill the man. Piece by piece. You mean to strip me down and kill me? Leek didn't bother listening to what Perch was saying, but Sprigg did. Listen, it clearly wants to live. It's even friends with Ginger. You saw that yourself. Mean your useless daughter of yours? Great. Another reason you cling to, not to sell him off. Just shut up and do this, Sprigg. Of that grand plan we are going with. Enough, Kurama said. The weakling will get us both killed before I can even get out of this casket. Hey, you hear me, Tin Can? Get up. Those two want you dead. You could kill them easily. The hell is wrong with you? No one can hold us here. Kurama's words weren't reaching Perch, but as his pain increased, his soul burnt black and hot. Perch fell to his knees and seemed an easy target for the approaching men. Until his hand struck and lay Sprigg low on the ground, injured. Leek was tossed even further down the mountain. As Perch stood, he looked down at the hurt Sprigg. I am Perch. You are Kurama. Lend me your power, and let the shadow in our souls consume those who would stop the truth. Smoke and shadows begin to leak from every crack and gap in Perch's form. Sprigg screamed and stood running down the mountain, the dark aura following after him. Sprigg heard far behind him a single scream from Leek, and then the sound of snapping branches where none should be. As Sprigg arrived home, he found his wife at the door with a crossbow loaded and pointed straight at him. She apparently had been planning with Leek to kill her husband and run off with the man once they had made their fortune. So Leek wept as his wife approached him with the crossbow, explaining that her and his best friend would be leaving soon. Sprigg looked up at her as a metallic hand closed around the front of the crossbow bolt. He heard a pinging noise as Perch ripped the crossbow from his wife's hands. The woman shrieked and began to back away as Perch pushed past her into the shop. He grabbed the mightiest weapon, a great maul, from the wall and began to pulverize things around him, feeling out its weight, destroying the house of Sprigg. He then turned about to the woman as she grabbed up a dagger and ran straight toward him. With a single blow, he cast her aside, broken to the ground. Perch approached Sprigg, crouched on the ground, weeping, apologizing. I didn't mean to scare you. I just need to live. And she was going to kill you. Sprigg looked up at the man, as that is all he could see now, was a strange metallic man, as he began to calm a bit. I'll go talk to Ginger. I know she won't understand everything, but thank you. You should leave town, get far away from here, or else People will have to know that you killed those two. Perch went to his place behind Sprig's home, where he had stayed previously, trying to make some sense of everything that had happened. You did well. I'm impressed you could manage that, though it was mostly my doing. What are you? Well, I am Kurama, the Crimson Fox, if you prefer. And we have a bit of catching up to do. With that, Perch found himself in a strange room, where sat a single desk and a single chair, with a strange, lithe figure he had never seen reclined in it. Welcome to what I have come to dub our soul chamber, Perch. I do hope you enjoy the view. The man sat across from Perch in his blue chair, wearing white robes with a red sash and long red hair with a single streak of silver. Seems our cooperation earlier let me have a little more freedom in here. It's not exactly my aesthetic, but it's better than the pure darkness we had before. Where is this? What the hell is going on here? Perch was struggling to keep everything in order. It was moving so fast. I told you, Tin Can. I am Kurama, and I must say, I didn't expect you to keep that clunky body in here. Must be how you perceive yourself. I'd really hoped to see the real man behind it. But whatever. In short, I could talk to you now, and we could even meet here sometimes. Seems to be keeping me from gaining dominance, but we'll see how long that lasts. For now, here's the plan. You do what I tell you, and we both live happy and pleasant lives, whatever the hell we are now. Is that a deal, Perch? Perch was coming around to understand what was going on. He looked at Kurama with a cold, metallic expression. No. I'm sorry, you will not be controlling anything, especially not me. But you liked killing them, didn't you? The rush of the crude smashing grab, the power in snuffing out a life, all things we can do whenever we want. Just listen to me. Perch! Perch! The metallic man looked to the side. Ginger is here. We'll talk later, thief. And with that, he was gone, leaving Kurama alone. Strong-willed. Well, play his game. At least I'm starting to get a bit of momentum now. Perch would end up having a soft conversation with Ginger, explaining to the best he could what had happened to her mother and why he would have to leave. He was deeply saddened, as the girl was saddened, and she was the only bright light he had known in his very short existence on this world. Still, he had to leave now, and had to leave quickly. Spriggs returned an hour later with some small amount of supplies and handed them to Perch, cueing his time to leave. Perch has now been traveling for 13 years. It has been a slow process filled with endless dead ends and the need to constantly conceal himself. After combing everywhere he could think of for clues to his origins, he has only been met with fear and judgment. Nature has become a retreat for Perch, as animals tend to favor him over men. And Kurama has begun to become more and more active, though Perch is still able to keep a check on him. Bandits, travelers, and some crazed beasts have been the only real obstacles for Perch, and the only times he has began to flex these strange, shadowy powers that now drive him to question his existence. And there we have the last story of this evening, the tale of the figure known as Perch, or Kurama. With that, we draw an end to our long-winded night of stories, backstories, and tales of the characters that make up the tales of my campaign. Each of these figures have shown up and played their part, and Pharaoh, Tortuga, Malachite, Rasmussen, the Laundry, and Perch make up the current party dynamic as they head in to a very dark future where many of their secrets are starting to become revealed. I sure hope everybody had a fun time this evening and didn't mind me going on and on about everyone's tales. I do so love discussing the lore of my world. It was worth it to stay up to 4 a.m. Holy shit, Sobe Daniels. Well, I'll get straight to the poll then, so everybody who's been staying up and been sticking through it can get in their votes. Well, it seems arrived at the very finale. Yes, unfortunately, Spark. I'm sorry to hear that. That was wonderful. Big Pog Dog. This was dope. Hell yeah, hell yeah. So, let's go ahead and call up our first poll. And I think everyone knows where we're going with this. And this is your favorite backstory of the evening. I understand people could not catch them all, but we'll go ahead and see if we can get all of these up here. We have, of course, Milo, Pharaoh, Tortuga, Malachite, Rasmussen. And it seems we might be cut here, so we'll have to do a bit of rearranging, I'm afraid. As Milo is no longer in the story, should it be? No. No. Instead, how best to do this? Allow additional votes? No. Let us see, then. Instead, we will combine a couple of characters from the same player. We will combine Milo and Valandria, as they were one player's invention, into one of our categories. That leaves Pharaoh, Tortuga, Malachite, Rasmussen, and Perch. I believe the final person we will cut, and I do apologize, Juniper, but as you have an unfair advantage for being the one who has sent so many of my lovely viewers this way, I'm afraid Pharaoh shall be cut from this particular poll. So here we have it. Our first poll showing most of the characters. I'm sorry, the poll only allows so many options, so I did have to cut out a few people. But here we are. Who was your favorite backstory of the evening, either through my presentation or more hopefully through the player's invention? Torn between Malachite and Valandria. Those are some very good backstories. Will you be uploading this as a VOD so I can catch the others? Of course. I work to put everything I have into my archive, as Pythor has thankfully posted for you. I currently have, I believe, 7 streams. Unfortunately, one of them never ended up getting uploaded to the archive, so there is one Storytime stream missing. But you will be able to catch this VOD there, or here if you are looking for it right after the stream ends. Am I that drunk, or is the vote link not showing up? It looks like some people already are voting, so Halfrost, you might be that drunk. You could take a look, though, and see kind of how things are going. But we do have a good handful of votes already in. And I hope you get yours in because we're already heavily leaning in one direction. Oh no, Halfrost, no. No, my big gifter. Please, there's only 30 seconds left. I know you can do it. Well, well, well. As we begin wrapping up the stream, I also have one more question after this to ask everybody. And it's the question I ask. Oh, I expect a link, not a pop down. Oh, there you go. Hurry up, hurry up. We're almost out of time. There is a small story behind Milo being Snufkin. But first, by a wide margin, it seems Perch has won the victory of the backstories. Though, I cannot deny, it is a very interesting one. One filled with a lot of intrigue, and I'm a little proud of, as I, being heavily involved in my player's amnesia backstory, I've been able to help write certain portions of it alongside him. But yes, it looks like everybody loves the Big Daddy. Oh, I'm sorry. I know, it did seem like a wide vote across, as Tortugo, Malachite, Milo, and Rasmussen all received the votes of their own. I'm afraid I misspelt your name, Tortuga. I'm sorry, don't punish me. I was in a panic to get the poll up. And there is Milkmaid, the man who plays Perch. If anyone has any questions for him, feel free to ping him up. Perch hit different for you, Crazy Seth? Hell yeah. Really like Val. Well, I'm glad everybody has their favorites. But now we're moving into the last poll of the evening, and that is, what shall I do next? This is how I like to end all of my D&D streams, as I leave the guiding of each stream up to the people I hope are enjoying it most and are excited to view it. Next on our options is the one I have to include every time. More lore. Would you guys like for me to go into the lore of more nations? We've only gone through 2 up to this point, so we have another 70 full nations of lore for me to get through. We can, of course, have a full story time, where I tell the tale of the next arc in our sessions. And at this point, we are a few sessions behind, so there's a lot of material for us to get into. Now, as brought up, I could also share my own backstories, go into the tales of some of the characters I've invented, but never gotten a real chance to play. Basically, very similar to this, but instead of stories of my current party, stories of the characters I've made. And finally, a fun one I know people had with last time is design an encounter. Now, we will not be going as hard as we did for the Danger, Danger, Redeem of last stream, but I think playing around with building a map and designing an encounter with my viewers was such a fun experience. I want to put up the option to do it again sometime in the future. And so, I would like to post it up for everyone to take a look at. And so, here comes the last poll of the evening. What would you like to see next? Perch hit different like a fresh McDonald's Sprite? Ah, a fountain fan, I see. A very interesting choice. I'm unbelievably happy that people like Perch. Yeah, Milkmaid, people fucking in love with them. Though I do think it might have been, a good portion of my storytelling prowess. Eric finna be the next Matt Miller. Matt Miller, do you mean Mercer? Hallfrost, did you just try to say Matt Mercer and say Miller? Oh boy, there's about to be some words in the comments. I just hop in here and see a tardigrade in a French-made outfit. Let's go, boys. Hell yeah. Unfortunately, meet them cheeks. We are coming to the end of the stream, but I do auto VOD. And if you're interested or enjoy any of my D&D VODs, I do have a YouTube archive that includes all of the streams that I talk about my homebrew material and my current campaign.
Lore sounds good, I guess. Hell yeah. I would love more world lore, but I really like the stories of the party. That is understandable. Everybody likes a good D&D story. It'd be cool if we could make some sort of puzzle together. Well, in that case, I might actually show you guys the riddles I've made for a one-off session I've done before. See if you guys like it. Design encounter sounds interesting. I want to learn how it's done. Hell yeah. Well, you'll learn how I do it. There's always an infinite ways to make encounters, and I'm certain we'll have some forever DMs in chat explaining their own preferences. Yes, Mercer, Lamau. I seek the backstory of Eric. Hell yeah. Oh, of Eric being related to witches. Crazy? God damn it. Seth, I've told you. It's fine. We'll talk about it later, okay? Don't worry, it's not important. Okay, so on my dad's side, I'm technically related to design and encounter, y'all? Beating out lore, backstories, or a story time? Well then, I'll have to get ready. I guess I have been plotting on putting my characters through a heist story. So maybe we can all have some fun next weekend, designing ourselves a little bank robbery, if you all are interested. Like a strides or wider, some more carbonation. It's the back of your throat. I'd love to see some more world building and lore arc. Eric blue balling us with his witch story, of course. I do so and love teasing my listeners just a little bit. I feel bad for poor story time. I know. Now, I will probably still mix in 1 or 2 sessions of story, especially as it's a big escort mission coming up, as we're doing design encounters and the like. But don't worry, as it seems like next stream, we'll be getting everyone involved in the very beginnings of designing a heist. Oh, a heist sounds fun. Hell yeah. I just watched Money Heist. I'm an expert now. Well then, we'll be needing you to show up so that we can design everything well. Now then, time is drawing near, and I have in fact gone far over the time I was expecting to this evening. So I must say good night to you all. And I hope to see you again. Oh, one more thing from Blinty Boy. Hey, Blinty Boy. Ara. Good night, y'all.